The glass shattered against the workshop floor, and Teresa Parker's hands trembled as she stared at the ruins of 3 days' work, knowing her brother would be furious when he discovered she had attempted his most difficult commission without permission. It was 1882 in Spokane Falls, Washington Territory, and the autumn wind rattled the windows of the small glass-blowing workshop that sat on the edge of town where the prairie met civilization. Teresa swept up the broken pieces quickly, her heart hammering. Her brother Marcus had left that morning to deliver finished pieces to clients in the neighboring mining camps, and she had thought she would surprise him by completing the intricate glass bird that a wealthy rancher had ordered for his wife's birthday. Instead, she had proven what Marcus always said, that she was too delicate for this work, too fragile herself to handle something that required such strength and precision. She was 22 years old and had spent the last 5 years assisting her brother in his workshop after their parents died of cholera. Marcus was a talented glassblower, one of the few in the Washington Territory, and his work was sought after from Seattle to Spokane and beyond. But he was also protective, insisting that Teresa only handle the books and prepare materials, never allowing her near the furnace or the blowpipe. She had learned by watching, memorizing every movement, every breath, every turn of the wrist that transformed molten glass into beauty. The bell above the workshop door chimed, and Teresa jumped, nearly dropping the dustpan of broken glass. A tall figure filled the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun so that she could not make out his features at first. Then he stepped inside, and she found herself looking up at a cowboy who seemed to take up all the air in the small room. He was broad-shouldered and weathered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of summer sky. His hat was dusty from travel, and he wore a bandana around his neck, a leather vest over a work-worn shirt, and chaps that suggested he had just come from riding. He moved with a careful grace, as if constantly aware of his own strength and the space he occupied. "Madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal brown hair that needed cutting, "I am looking for Marcus Parker. I was told this is his workshop." "He is not here at present," Teresa said, setting down the dustpan and brushing off her hands. She was acutely aware of her flushed face and the glass dust on her dark blue dress. "He should return tomorrow evening. May I help you with something?" The cowboy's gaze drifted to the dustpan of broken glass, then back to her face. His expression was kind but difficult to read. "I am Tucker Finch. I work for the Running Creek Ranch about 15 miles north of here. My boss, Mr. Hendricks, ordered a glass bird for his wife and I came to check on the progress. He is getting anxious as her birthday approaches." Teresa's stomach dropped. The glass bird, the one she had just destroyed. "I see," she managed. "Mr. Finch, I am afraid there has been a complication with that particular piece. My brother will need a few additional days to complete it." Tucker Finch's eyes returned to the broken glass, and she saw understanding dawn in them. He did not speak for a moment, just studied her with that same careful attention he seemed to give everything. Then he said quietly, "Was that it? There was no point in lying." "Yes, I was attempting to help and I made a mistake." She expected anger or frustration. Mr. Hendricks was known to be impatient, and his ranch hands would bear the brunt of his displeasure. But Tucker just nodded slowly, turning his hat in his hands. "These things happen," he said. "How much longer will it take? A week, perhaps. Maybe less if Marcus works day and night, but I cannot promise that." Teresa lifted her chin, trying to maintain some dignity. "I take full responsibility. If Mr. Hendricks wishes to cancel the order, we will return his deposit. No need for that." Tucker settled his hat back on his head. "I will tell him there was a delay in getting materials. A week should be fine." Teresa stared at him. "You would lie to your employer for us. not lying exactly, just leaving out details that do not concern him. Tucker's mouth quirked in something that was almost a smile. Besides, I have seen glass blowing before when I was younger. My mother had a glass vase she treasured, and I once watched the man who made it work. It is not easy. Takes a steady hand and a lot of courage to work with something so hot and so fragile at the same time. Something in his tone made Teresa look at him more closely. He spoke of glass blowing with understanding, and he looked at her without judgment. Most men in this territory were rough, quick to anger, impatient with anything that seemed weak or impractical. But Tucker Finch stood in her brother's workshop with dust on his boots and kindness in his eyes, and she felt something shift in her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. "That is generous of you. Just seems fair." He glanced around the workshop, taking in the furnace, the tools, the finished pieces waiting on shelves. "You have beautiful work here. Are these all your brothers?" "Most of them. I help with some of the simpler designs." It was not entirely true, but she was not ready to admit the extent of her involvement. Marcus would be angry enough when he returned. Tucker walked over to a shelf displaying several glass pieces. A delicate horse, a set of drinking glasses etched with wheat patterns, a small bird that was less ornate than the commission but no less lovely. He studied them with genuine interest, his large, work-roughened hands clasped behind his back as if he did not trust himself to touch them. "You make these?" he asked, nodding toward the simpler designs. Teresa hesitated. "Some of them. They are fine work." He looked back at her, and there was something in his expression that made her heart beat faster. "You have a gift." "My brother has the gift. I merely assist. Seems to me that anyone who can create something beautiful like this has a gift all their own." Tucker moved toward the door, then paused. "I need to head back to the ranch, but I will return in a week for the bird. And madam, do not be too hard on yourself about the mistake. The best way to learn is by doing, and doing sometimes means breaking things." After he left, Teresa stood in the empty workshop for a long time, staring at the door and thinking about the cowboy with the gentle voice and careful movements. She cleaned up the remaining glass, banked the furnace, and locked up for the evening, but her mind kept returning to Tucker Finch. There had been something different about him, something that made her want to prove she was more than Marcus's timid sister, who could not handle real work. The next evening, Marcus returned tired and irritable from his travels. Teresa confessed immediately about the broken commission, and his reaction was as bad as she had feared. "I told you never to attempt the difficult pieces," he said, running his hands through his dark hair in frustration. "Teresa, this is not a hobby. This is our livelihood. That commission is worth more than we make in a month on simple glassware. I know, and I am sorry, but Marcus, I have watched you for 5 years. I know the techniques. I just needed more practice with the fine details." "You do not have the strength for it," Marcus said, not unkindly but with the certainty of someone who had made up his mind long ago. "Glass blowing requires physical stamina, strong lungs, steady hands despite heat and fatigue. You are too delicate." The word stung because she had heard it all her life. Too delicate for rough play as a child. Too delicate to help their father with heavy work. Too delicate to handle the grief when their parents died, though she had managed it just fine while also keeping Marcus from drinking himself into an early grave. "I am stronger than you think," Teresa said quietly. Marcus softened, putting a hand on her shoulder. "I know you want to help, and you do. You keep the books, you handle clients, you prepare materials. That is valuable work. But the actual glass blowing, that is my responsibility. I will remake the bird and it will be finished in time. But please, Teresa, promise me you will not attempt this again." She promised, though the words tasted bitter. That night, lying in her small room above the workshop, she thought about Tucker Finch and the way he had looked at her work with respect. He had not called her delicate or weak. He had said she had a gift. Over the next week, Marcus worked tirelessly on the replacement commission. Teresa helped where she could, but she felt the weight of her brother's disappointment and her own frustration. She was trapped in a role that felt too small, too confining, and she did not know how to break free without destroying the fragile peace she and Marcus had built. On the 6th day after Tucker's first visit, disaster struck again, though this time it was not Teresa's fault. Marcus burned his hand badly while working on the final details of the glass bird. The burn was serious enough that he could not grip the blowpipe, could not perform the delicate work needed to finish the piece. "We have to send word to the ranch," Marcus said, his face pale with pain as Teresa wrapped his hand in clean cloth. "Tell them we cannot complete it in time." Teresa looked at the nearly finished bird on the workbench. It needed only the final details. The wings spread just so, the tail feathers flared, the tiny beak opened in song. She had watched Marcus work on it every evening, had memorized every step. "I can finish it," she said. "Teresa, no. Marcus, I can do this. The hardest part is done. It just needs the finishing touches, and you have shown me how to do those 100 times." She met his eyes, willing him to see her as something other than his delicate little sister. "Please, let me try." He was in too much pain to argue for long, and they both knew they could not afford to lose this commission. Finally, he nodded. "But I will supervise every step." Teresa worked through the afternoon and into the evening with Marcus directing her from a stool near the workbench. Her hands shook at first, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, to remember everything she had learned. The glass responded to her touch, warm and malleable, dangerous and beautiful. She shaped the wings with careful precision, added the delicate tail feathers, formed the beak with a tiny tool. When she finally set down the completed bird to cool, her arms ached and her face was flushed from the heat, but the piece was perfect. Marcus stared at it in silence for a long moment. Then he said, "You did well." It was the first time he had truly acknowledged her skill, and Teresa felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting to seem weak. The next day, Tucker Finch returned as promised. He arrived in the late morning, and Teresa was alone in the workshop when the bell chimed. Her heart jumped at the sight of him, and she was surprised by the intensity of her own reaction. She had thought about him often over the past week, though she had tried not to dwell on why. "Mr. Finch," she said, smoothing her apron, "you are punctual. I try to be." He removed his hat, and she noticed he had cleaned up since his last visit. His hair was trimmed, his face freshly shaved, his shirt clean though still well worn. "Is the bird ready?" "It is." Teresa retrieved the carefully wrapped package from the shelf and set it on the counter. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing the glass bird in all its delicate glory. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the window caught the glass, making it seem to glow from within. Tucker stepped closer, and she caught the scent of leather and sage. He studied the bird with the same careful attention he had given everything else, and she found herself holding her breath, waiting for his judgment. "It is beautiful," he said finally. "Better than I imagined. Mrs. Hendricks will love it. I am glad." Teresa began wrapping it again, but Tucker's hand covered hers, stopping her. His touch was warm and gentle, and she looked up in surprise. "You made this," he said. It was not a question. She could have denied it, but something about the way he looked at her made lying impossible. "I finished it." "My brother did most of the work, but you finished it." Tucker did not remove his hand. "I can tell. It has the same feeling as those other pieces you showed me. There is something different about your work, something softer but no less strong." Teresa's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her about her art before, had never acknowledged that she had a style or a vision of her own. "How can you tell?" I notice things. Part of being a good ranch hand is paying attention to details. He finally released her hand, and she felt oddly bereft. "You are talented, Miss Parker, more than you give yourself credit for. Teresa," she said impulsively. "My name is Teresa, Teresa." He said it slowly as if tasting the sound. "I am Tucker, and I want to ask you something, if I may be so bold." Her heart hammered. "Yes." "There is a dance in town next Saturday evening. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me?" Teresa had not been to a dance in over a year. Marcus disapproved of most social gatherings, thinking them frivolous, and she had no close friends in Spokane Falls. The other young women in town found her odd, too focused on her work, too quiet. But the thought of spending an evening with Tucker Finch made something flutter in her chest. "I would like that," she said. Tucker's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Then I will call for you at 7. Wear something you can move in. I am not the most graceful dancer, but I promise not to step on your feet too often." After he left with the carefully packaged bird, Teresa stood in the workshop and tried to remember how to breathe normally. She felt as if something had shifted in her world, as if the careful order of her life had been disrupted in the most wonderful way. Marcus was less enthusiastic when she told him about the dance. "You barely know this man," he said, flexing his bandaged hand with a wince. "He is a ranch hand, Teresa. What kind of future could there be with someone like that? It is one dance, not a marriage proposal." But even as she said it, Teresa felt a flush creep up her neck. "Besides, when have I ever had the chance to simply enjoy myself? You keep me locked up in this workshop like I am made of glass myself." "I keep you safe," Marcus corrected. "This territory is rough, and there are men out there who would take advantage of a woman alone." "I will not be alone. I will be with Tucker." She used his first name deliberately, claiming a familiarity she barely had the right to. "He is kind and respectful. You would see that if you gave him a chance." Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine, but I want to meet him before you go anywhere with him." Saturday came faster than Teresa expected. She spent the week helping Marcus with simpler pieces, all the while thinking about Tucker Finch and the dance. She had one good dress, a deep green cotton that brought out her eyes, and she spent an hour on Saturday afternoon pressing it and fixing her hair. When she looked at herself in the small mirror in her room, she barely recognized the flushed, bright-eyed young woman staring back at her. Tucker arrived promptly at 7, dressed in clean black trousers, a white shirt, and a string tie. He held his hat in his hands and stood patiently while Marcus interrogated him about his work, his intentions, and his character. Teresa watched from the doorway, amused by her brother's stern expression and Tucker's calm, straightforward answers. "I work for Mr. Hendricks at the Running Creek Ranch," Tucker said. "Have been there for 3 years now. I am a ranch hand, though Mr. Hendricks has hinted I might become foreman when old Pete retires next year. I have saved most of my wages, do not drink to excess, do not gamble, and I go to church when I can get away on Sundays." "And what are your intentions toward my sister?" Marcus asked bluntly. "To take her to a dance and hopefully make her smile," Tucker said, meeting Marcus's gaze steadily. "Beyond that, I cannot say. I barely know her, though I would like to remedy that. But I promise you, I will treat her with nothing but respect." Marcus grudgingly gave his approval, and Teresa hurried to get her shawl before her brother could think of more questions. Tucker helped her into his wagon with careful courtesy, and they set off toward town as the sun began to set over the rolling prairie. "Your brother is protective," Tucker said after a few minutes of silence. "He is all the family I have," Teresa replied, "and I am all he has. We look after each other." Nothing wrong with that. Tucker guided the horses easily, his movements confident and sure. Must get lonely sometimes, though, just the two of you. Sometimes, Teresa admitted, but the work keeps us busy and Marcus says that is enough. What do you say? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her what she wanted before. I say that work is important, but it is not everything. I want to create beautiful things, but I also want to live, to experience things beyond the four walls of the workshop. Tucker glanced at her, and there was warmth in his eyes. Then we will have to make sure you get that chance. The dance was held in the town hall, a large wooden building that served multiple purposes for the growing community of Spokane Falls. When they arrived, the hall was already crowded with people. Ranchers and their families, shop owners, miners from the nearby claims, and young people eager for entertainment. A four-piece band played in the corner, fiddle and guitar and banjo creating lively music that made Teresa's feet tap before they even entered. Tucker was not wrong about his dancing skills. He was competent but not particularly graceful, concentrating hard on the steps and occasionally apologizing when he moved the wrong direction. But he held her carefully, as if she truly were made of glass, and he looked at her with such genuine pleasure that she forgot to care about his missteps. Between dances, he brought her punch and introduced her to some of his friends from the ranch. They were rough men, most of them, but they treated her with courtesy and deference that surprised her. Tucker, she realized, was respected among them. When he spoke, they listened. When he made a joke, they laughed. He had a quiet authority that came not from aggression but from competence and fairness. "You are staring," Tucker said when they took a break from dancing, standing outside in the cool night air. "I am sorry. I was just thinking that you are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Teresa considered. "Someone rougher, I suppose, more like the other cowboys I have met, loud and brash and always looking for a fight." "There are plenty of those in this territory," Tucker agreed, "but I was raised different. My mother taught me that real strength is knowing when not to use your fists, and my father showed me that gentle hands can accomplish more than rough ones. They were farmers in Oregon, worked hard all their lives and taught me the value of patience. They have passed. My father 5 years ago, my mother just this past winter. That is why I came to Washington Territory, to make a fresh start." Tucker leaned against the railing, looking out at the dark prairie beyond town. "I miss them, but I think they would be proud of the life I am building here." Teresa moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I think they would be. You are a good man, Tucker Finch." He turned to look at her, and the moonlight caught his face, highlighting the strong bones and kind eyes. "I think you are remarkable, Teresa Parker. And not just because of your talent with glass. You have a strength that your brother does not see, a fire that should not be contained." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her. It was soft and careful, a question more than a demand, and Teresa answered it by rising on her toes and kissing him back. His arms came around her, strong and warm, and she felt safer than she had in years, as if she had finally found a place where she belonged. They broke apart slowly, and Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "I should not have done that without permission." "I gave permission," Teresa said, her heart racing, "and I would give it again." He laughed softly, the sound rumbling through his chest. "You are going to turn my world upside down, Teresa Parker." "Good. Someone should." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dancing and talking and stolen moments outside where they could be alone. By the time Tucker drove her home, Teresa felt as if she had known him for years rather than weeks. He walked her to the workshop door and kissed her again, slower this time, and she melted into him, forgetting to be careful or proper or any of the things young women were supposed to be. "I want to see you again," Tucker said when they finally broke apart. "As often as you will allow." "Come by the workshop," Teresa said. "Anytime. Marcus will grumble, but he will get used to it." Over the following weeks, Tucker became a regular visitor to the glass-blowing workshop. He came in the evenings after finishing his work at the ranch, sometimes bringing small gifts: wildflowers from the prairie, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, fresh bread from the ranch cook. He would sit and watch her work, asking intelligent questions about the process, and admiring the pieces she created when Marcus was out making deliveries. Marcus, true to Teresa's prediction, grumbled about the visits but could not find any real fault with Tucker. The cowboy was unfailingly polite, never stayed too late, and clearly had honorable intentions. More importantly, Teresa was happier than Marcus had seen her in years. She smiled more, laughed more, and her work seemed to take on new life. The pieces she created during this time had a lightness to them, a joy that had been missing before. Tucker, for his part, was falling deeply in love. He had never met anyone like Teresa, creative and strong-willed but also kind and thoughtful. She saw the world differently than anyone he knew, found beauty in small things, and approached her work with a dedication that matched his own approach to ranching. When she talked about glass blowing, her whole face lit up, and he found himself fascinated by the way her hands moved when she described a particular technique or design. One evening in late October, Tucker arrived at the workshop to find Teresa in tears. She was sitting on the floor surrounded by broken glass, her hands bleeding from where she had tried to clean up the shards. "What happened?" Tucker knelt beside her, carefully taking her hands in his and examining the cuts. They were not deep, but there were several of them, and her hands were shaking. "I dropped a whole tray of finished pieces," Teresa said, her voice thick with tears. "Marcus has been working on them for weeks, and I was just carrying them to the shelf when I tripped. They are ruined, all of them, and we needed the money from those sales." Tucker pulled out his bandana and began carefully wrapping her hands. "Accidents happen. Marcus will understand. He will say I am too clumsy, too delicate to be trusted with the finished work." The words came out bitter. "He will use this as more proof that I should stick to bookkeeping and leave the real work to him." "Is that what you think? That you are too delicate?" Teresa looked at him through her tears. "I do not know what I think anymore. I want to believe I am strong enough to do this work, but every time I make a mistake, it feels like proof that everyone else is right." Tucker finished wrapping her hands and then gently cupped her face, making her look at him. "Listen to me, Teresa. You are one of the strongest people I know. Strength is not about never making mistakes. It is about getting back up when you fall, about trying again even when you are scared. You think I never mess up at the ranch. I have lost cattle, broken equipment, made judgments that cost Mr. Hendricks money. But I learn from those mistakes and I keep going. That is what real strength looks like. But glass is different. When you break glass, it is gone. You cannot fix it. So you make new glass, better glass, because you learned from what went wrong before." Tucker smiled at her, brushing away her tears with his thumb. "And you know what else? Glass might be fragile, but it is also incredibly strong in the right circumstances. It can withstand heat that would destroy wood, can last for generations if handled properly. Being fragile does not mean being weak." Teresa leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "How do you always know what to say?" "I do not. I just know you and I see what you cannot see in yourself yet." He kissed her forehead softly. "Come on. Let us clean this up together, and then I am taking you away from here for the evening. You need a break." They cleaned up the broken glass carefully, and Tucker insisted on checking her hands again to make sure no shards remained in the cuts. Then he took her out to his wagon and drove her out of town, following a trail that led up into the low hills overlooking Spokane Falls. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and the autumn air was crisp and clean. Tucker stopped the wagon at a spot that overlooked the falls themselves, where the Spokane River tumbled over basalt rocks in a display of natural power. They sat together on a blanket he kept in the wagon, and Teresa leaned against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him through his shirt. "I used to come up here when I first arrived in the territory," Tucker said. "Whenever the work got hard or I felt lonely, I would ride up here and watch the falls. Reminded me that there are forces in this world much bigger than my problems." "It is beautiful," Teresa said softly. "Thank you for bringing me here. I want to bring you here more often. I want to show you all the beautiful places I have found in this territory." Tucker turned to look at her, and there was something serious in his expression. "Teresa, I know we have not known each other long, but I need you to know something. I am falling in love with you. Actually, I think I already have fallen. You are in my thoughts from the moment I wake until I go to sleep, and even then I dream about you." Teresa's breath caught. She had suspected his feelings ran deep, had felt the same pull herself, but hearing him say the words made it real in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I think I started falling that first day when you were so kind about the broken commission. You looked at me like I was more than just Marcus's little sister, like I was someone worth knowing." Tucker pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You are worth knowing, worth cherishing, and I want to spend every day proving that to you if you will let me." They sat together until the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Tucker told her about his hopes of eventually owning his own ranch, a small place where he could raise horses and maybe a few cattle. Teresa told him about her dream of opening her own glass-blowing studio, a place where she could create freely without always being under Marcus's shadow. "You should do it," Tucker said. "Open your own studio." "With what money? I barely have any savings, and Marcus depends on my help in the workshop." "Marcus is good enough now that he could hire someone to help with the simple tasks, and as for money, we will find a way. I have some saved up, and if we combine our resources." He trailed off, realizing what he was suggesting. Teresa pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face in the starlight. "Tucker Finch, are you proposing to me?" he laughed, shaking his head. "Not yet. When I propose, it will be proper, with a ring and on one knee and all the things a woman deserves. But I am saying that I see a future with you, Teresa. A future where we build something together, where we support each other's dreams." "I see that future too," Teresa said. And then she kissed him, pouring all her hope and fear and love into it. When Tucker finally took her home that night, Marcus was waiting up, worried sick. But when he saw Teresa's face, glowing with happiness despite the bandages on her hands, he held his tongue. His sister was in love, and for the first time in years, he saw her as the woman she had become rather than the girl she had been. The winter of 1882 brought snow and cold to Spokane Falls, and with it came challenges. The glass-blowing workshop was harder to heat, making the already difficult work even more taxing. Marcus's burned hand healed slowly, and though he regained most of his mobility, it was never quite the same. He began to rely on Teresa more, grudgingly admitting that she had the skill to handle complex pieces. Tucker visited less frequently during the worst of the winter, as the work at the ranch intensified. But whenever he could get away, he made the ride into town, sometimes arriving half-frozen but always with a smile for Teresa. They would sit by the furnace in the workshop, warming themselves and talking for hours. Tucker brought news from the outside world. A bad storm that had cost the ranch several head of cattle, a mountain lion that had been spotted near the property, plans for a new barn come spring. Teresa showed him the pieces she was working on, and Tucker watched with endless fascination. He saw how she transformed raw materials into beauty, how she breathed life into glass with her careful manipulation of heat and form. She made him a small glass horse for Christmas, perfect in every detail, and he treasured it as if it were made of gold. "You gave him a horse," Marcus said when Tucker had left that evening, shaking his head. "Sister, that piece could have sold for good money." "Some things are more important than money," Teresa replied, not bothering to hide her smile. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "He is going to ask you to marry him, is he not?" "I hope so. And you will say yes, in a heartbeat." "Then I suppose I should start getting used to the idea of running this workshop alone." Marcus's tone was resigned but not entirely unhappy. "You deserve happiness, Teresa. And if that cowboy makes you happy, then I will give you my blessing." In January of 1883, Tucker was promoted to foreman at the Running Creek Ranch. Mr. Hendricks was impressed with his work ethic and his ability to manage the other hands without creating resentment. The promotion came with better pay and a small cabin on the ranch property, currently used for storage but easily converted into living quarters. Tucker shared the news with Teresa on a cold Sunday afternoon when he rode into town specifically to see her. They walked through the snowy streets of Spokane Falls, bundled in coats and scarves, their breath misting in the air. "It is a good opportunity," Teresa said, genuinely happy for him. "You have worked hard for this." "I have, but the cabin is what really matters." Tucker stopped walking and turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "Mr. Hendricks said I could fix it up however I wanted, make it into a real home. And Teresa, I do not want to make it into a home for just myself." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. Then, despite the snow and the cold and the fact that they were standing in the middle of the street, he got down on one knee. "Teresa Parker, you have changed my life in ways I cannot fully express. You have shown me that gentleness and strength can exist together, that fragile things can be powerful, and that love can happen fast and still be real. I know I am just a cowboy, and I know you deserve someone who can give you fine things and an easy life. But I promise you this. I will spend every day of my life treating your heart with the same gentle strength I have seen you use with your glass. I will support your dreams and protect your spirit and love you with everything I have. Will you marry me?" Teresa was crying, but they were happy tears. She pulled him to his feet and kissed him hard, not caring who might see. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The ring was simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small diamond that caught the winter light. Tucker slipped it onto her finger with shaking hands, and they stood together in the snow, holding each other and laughing with pure joy. Marcus, when they told him, was predictably emotional. He embraced Tucker roughly, then his sister, then both of them together. "You take care of her," he told Tucker gruffly. "She is more precious than any glass she has ever made." "I know," Tucker said solemnly, "and I will guard her with my life." They decided to marry in the spring, giving Tucker time to fix up the cabin and Teresa time to help Marcus find and train an assistant for the workshop. The months between the engagement and the wedding were busy and happy. Teresa divided her time between helping Marcus and preparing for her new life. She made glass decorations for the cabin, working on them in secret to surprise Tucker. A set of drinking glasses, a vase for flowers, small animals that could sit on shelves. Tucker spent every spare moment working on the cabin. He repaired the roof, replaced boards, built furniture, and installed a proper stove. He wanted everything to be perfect for Teresa, wanted her to have a home that was comfortable and warm. Some of the other ranch hands helped, and the cabin slowly transformed from a neglected storage building into a cozy home. The wedding was held on a bright Saturday in April of 1883 at the small church in Spokane Falls. Teresa wore a simple white dress that she and Marcus had scrimped to buy, and she carried wildflowers that Tucker had picked that morning. Marcus walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and Tucker waited at the altar looking nervous and hopeful and more handsome than Teresa had ever seen him. The ceremony was short but heartfelt. They exchanged vows in front of the small gathering of friends and neighbors, promising to love and honor each other through all the challenges life might bring. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Tucker kissed Teresa with a gentleness that made her heart swell. The reception was held at the workshop, with simple food and drink and music from a borrowed fiddle. They danced their first dance as husband and wife in the same space where they had first met, and Teresa thought about how much had changed in less than a year. She had gone from being Marcus's invisible assistant to being Tucker Finch's wife, and the future stretched before her full of possibility. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Tucker lifted Teresa into his arms, making her laugh in surprise. "What are you doing?" "Carrying my bride to our wagon," Tucker said, grinning. "It is tradition, is it not? I can walk, you know." "I know, but I like holding you, and I intend to do it as often as possible for the rest of our lives." He carried her out to the wagon amid cheers and laughter, and they drove toward the Running Creek Ranch as the sun set over the prairie. Teresa leaned against Tucker's shoulder, watching the landscape roll by and feeling utterly content. The cabin was better than she had imagined. Tucker had clearly poured his heart into making it a home, with careful attention to every detail. There were curtains on the windows, rugs on the floor, and a bed he had built himself with a real mattress rather than just a hay tick. He had even installed shelves for her glass pieces, which she discovered waiting in a box by the door. "I went to the workshop earlier this week when you were out," Tucker admitted. "Marcus helped me pack them carefully. I wanted you to have your work here with us." Teresa set out the glass pieces one by one, arranging them on the shelves where they caught the lamplight. The cabin felt more like home with them there, a reminder that she did not have to give up her art to be Tucker's wife. Their wedding night was tender and a little awkward, as first times often are, but filled with love and patience. Tucker was careful with her, conscious always of his greater strength, and Teresa marveled at how someone so physically powerful could be so gentle. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, talking quietly about their hopes for the future. "I want to give you everything," Tucker said, running his fingers through her hair. "A good life, children if you want them, and always a place where you can create your art." "I do not need everything," Teresa replied. "I just need you and the freedom to be myself. That is more than enough." Life at the Running Creek Ranch was different from anything Teresa had experienced before. She woke before dawn to make breakfast for Tucker before he went out to work, then spent her days keeping the cabin clean, tending a small garden and working on her glass blowing. Tucker had surprised her by building a small workshop behind the cabin, complete with a furnace he had designed with help from Marcus. It was not as elaborate as her brother's setup, but it was enough for her to continue creating. Mrs. Hendricks, the ranch owner's wife, became an unexpected friend. She was a sophisticated woman from San Francisco who had followed her husband to the Washington Territory and often found herself lonely among the rough ranch hands and their families. She loved Teresa's glasswork and commissioned several pieces, paying generously and introducing Teresa to other wealthy women in the area. "You have real talent," Mrs. Hendricks said one afternoon while visiting the cabin to collect a set of etched wine glasses. "You could make a good living from this if you wanted to sell more widely." "I would like that," Teresa admitted, "but I am not sure how to reach customers beyond Spokane Falls." "Leave that to me. I have friends in Seattle, Portland, even San Francisco. I can introduce your work to people who will appreciate it." Mrs. Hendricks smiled warmly. "Every artist needs a patron, my dear. Let me be yours." True to her word, Mrs. Hendricks began showing Teresa's work to her network of wealthy friends and acquaintances. Orders began to trickle in, then flow more steadily. Teresa found herself busier than she had ever been, working late into the evening to complete commissions. The money was good, better than she had expected, and she carefully saved most of it, thinking about the future she and Tucker were building together. Tucker supported her work completely, never complaining about the long hours she spent in the workshop or the fact that dinner was sometimes late because she had been focused on a tricky piece. He would come home tired from the ranch, wash up, and then sit in the workshop to watch her create, marveling at her skill and dedication. "You light up when you work," he told her one evening. "Like there is a fire inside you that only comes out when you are making something beautiful." "I feel most myself when I am creating," Teresa said, shaping molten glass with practiced movements. "Like this is what I was meant to do. Then you should do it as much as you can. Life is too short to spend it being anything other than yourself." In the summer of 1883, Marcus came to visit the ranch for the first time since the wedding. He had been busy with his own work and with training his new assistant, a young man named Peter, who showed promise but still needed constant supervision. Marcus looked tired but pleased to see his sister so happy and settled. Tucker gave Marcus a tour of the ranch, showing him the operation with obvious pride. Marcus, who had never spent much time around cattle or horses, was impressed by the scale of everything and by Tucker's clear competence in his role as foreman. "You have done well for yourself," Marcus told Tucker as they stood by the corral, watching the ranch hands work with a new batch of horses. "And more importantly, you have taken good care of my sister. I can see that she is happy." "Happier than I ever hoped to make anyone," Tucker said honestly. "She is the best thing that ever happened to me, Marcus. I know you worried about her marrying a simple cowboy, but I promise you, I will spend my life trying to be worthy of her." "You already are," Marcus said gruffly. "Any man who looks at his wife the way you look at Teresa, like she hung the moon and stars, is worthy in my book." That evening, the three of them sat together in the cabin, talking and laughing like old times. Marcus brought news from Spokane Falls. New businesses opening, the town growing as more people moved to the Washington Territory, and gossip about various townsfolk. He also brought a gift for Teresa, a set of specialty tools for glassblowing that he had ordered from San Francisco. "I know you have your own workshop now," Marcus said as Teresa examined the tools with delight. "And I know you do not need me looking over your shoulder anymore, but I thought these might help you create even more beautiful pieces." Teresa hugged her brother tightly. "Thank you, Marcus, for this, and for finally seeing me as more than just your delicate little sister." "You were never just that," Marcus said quietly. "I was just too scared of losing you to see how strong you really were. I am sorry for holding you back for so long." "You did not hold me back. You kept me safe until I was ready to fly on my own." Teresa smiled at him, then at Tucker. "And you helped me find someone who would let me fly while still keeping me safe." As autumn came again, bringing cooler temperatures and the busy season of preparing for winter, Teresa began to feel unwell. She was tired more than usual, and the smell of the furnace sometimes made her nauseous. At first, she thought it was just from working too hard, But when the symptoms persisted, Mrs. Hendricks gently suggested she might be with child. Teresa had not considered the possibility, but once it was mentioned, she realized it made sense. She and Tucker had been married for nearly 6 months, and they had certainly not been careful about preventing pregnancy. The thought of having a baby was both thrilling and terrifying. She was only 23, and while many women her age already had children, she had been so focused on her art that motherhood had seemed distant. She told Tucker one evening after he came home from work, sitting him down at the small table in their cabin and taking his hands in hers. "I have something to tell you," she said, watching his face carefully. "I think I am going to have a baby." Tucker's expression went through several rapid changes: surprise, confusion, understanding, and finally pure joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Teresa, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy about it?" she asked, even though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy. I am over the moon, terrified but over the moon." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining. "Are you happy about it?" "I am," Teresa said, surprised to find it was true. "I am scared too, but I am happy. We are going to be parents, Tucker." They held each other for a long time, talking about the future and all the things they needed to do to prepare. Tucker immediately began planning to add a room to the cabin for the baby, and Teresa started thinking about how she would balance her glass-blowing work with caring for a child. It would not be easy, but with Tucker's support, she believed she could do both. The pregnancy was difficult at times. Teresa's work at the furnace became increasingly challenging as she grew larger, and the heat that had never bothered her before became oppressive. She had to cut back on her commissions, which frustrated her, but Tucker insisted that her health and the baby's health were more important than any amount of money. "The glass will still be there after the baby comes," he told her gently when she protested about refusing another commission. "But you only get one chance to take care of yourself during this pregnancy. Please, Teresa, let yourself rest." She tried to follow his advice, but it was hard for her to be idle. She had spent so many years fighting to prove she was strong enough to do the work she loved, and now her own body was forcing her to slow down. Tucker saw her frustration and tried to help in whatever ways he could, taking over more of the household chores and bringing her small projects she could work on without standing at the furnace. In March of 1884, just before spring arrived, Teresa went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Tucker feared he might lose her. He sat by her bedside the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, feeling utterly helpless in the face of her pain. But Teresa was stronger than anyone had ever given her credit for. She endured the labor with gritted determination, and finally, as the sun rose on a cold morning, their son was born. He was small but healthy, with a powerful set of lungs that he demonstrated immediately. Tucker held his son for the first time with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Teresa, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Marcus Finch, after Tucker's father and Teresa's brother. Marcus came to visit a week after the birth and was deeply moved to discover his nephew shared his name. He held the baby carefully, as if Thomas were made of glass, and looked at his sister with new respect. "You did it," Marcus said softly. "You survived something I never could have endured." "I am sorry, Teresa, for ever calling you delicate. You are the strongest person I know." Teresa, exhausted but glowing with happiness, smiled at her brother. "I learned from you, Marcus. You taught me that beautiful things are worth fighting for even when the process is painful." The first months of Thomas's life were challenging. He was colicky and cried often, especially at night, and Teresa was exhausted from the constant demands of caring for an infant. Her glass-blowing workshop sat unused, and she felt a pang of loss every time she looked at the cold furnace. She loved her son desperately, but she also missed the creative work that had defined her for so long. Tucker saw her struggle and tried to help. He would take Thomas in the evenings after work, walking with him and soothing him so Teresa could rest. On his days off, he insisted she spend time in her workshop, even if it was just to organize tools or sketch designs. Slowly, as Thomas grew and became easier, Teresa found her way back to her art. When Thomas was 6 months old, Teresa created her first piece since his birth. It was a small glass mobile of birds and clouds that she hung over his cradle, and watching her son's eyes track the dancing pieces of glass, she felt a sense of completion. She was a mother and an artist, and she could be both. Mrs. Hendricks was understanding about Teresa's reduced output, and when she saw the mobile, she immediately commissioned one for a grandchild. Other mothers saw it and wanted their own, and suddenly, Teresa had found a new market for her work, pieces designed specifically for children. She created mobiles, small figurines, sun catchers, all with the safety and wonder of children in mind. "You have an eye for what appeals to young ones," Mrs. Hendricks said, examining a set of glass animals Teresa had created. "These will sell wonderfully." "I think you have found your niche, my dear." The work was different from what Teresa had done before, but no less satisfying. She enjoyed thinking about how children would interact with her pieces, the joy and wonder they might bring. And the commissions allowed her to work at her own pace, fitting glass-blowing around Thomas's schedule. Tucker watched his wife find her balance and felt his love for her deepen. She had not let motherhood diminish her, had not allowed anyone to force her into a single role. She was Teresa, artist, mother, wife, all at once, and she made it look effortless even though he knew it was anything but. When Thomas was a year old, the Running Creek Ranch faced its biggest crisis. A harsh winter had depleted their hay supplies, and a late spring snow killed off much of the new grass. The cattle were starving, and Mr. Hendricks faced the prospect of losing most of his herd. As foreman, Tucker worked brutal hours trying to keep the animals alive, hauling hay from distant sources and searching for any patches of grass that had survived the snow. Teresa saw her husband growing gaunt and exhausted, but she knew the ranch's survival depended on his efforts. She supported him however she could, making sure he had hot meals ready whenever he came home and taking care of Thomas entirely on her own. She also used her connections through Mrs. Hendricks to find additional sources of hay, reaching out to ranchers in other parts of the territory who had been less affected by the harsh weather. Her efforts made a real difference. The hay she found helped supplement what Tucker had located, and enough cattle survived that Mr. Hendricks was able to rebuild his herd. The ranch owner was grateful and gave Tucker a bonus that was nearly equal to 6 months' wages. "You saved us," Mr. Hendricks told Tucker and Teresa together one evening when he came to the cabin to deliver the bonus. "Both of you. Tucker with his tireless work and Teresa with her resourcefulness. I will not forget this." With the bonus money and Teresa's growing income from her glass work, they were able to save a substantial amount. Tucker began to seriously consider his dream of owning his own ranch, and he and Teresa spent evenings planning what that might look like. They wanted a small place, just enough land to raise horses and maybe a few cattle, with room for Teresa to have a proper glass studio. In the fall of 1885, opportunity knocked in an unexpected way. A neighboring rancher, old Mr. Patterson, died without heirs, and his property went up for sale. It was only 200 acres, small by ranching standards, but it had good water, a decent house, and several outbuildings that could be converted for various uses. The price was more than Tucker and Teresa had saved, but Mr. Hendricks offered to loan them the difference with generous repayment terms. "You have been loyal to me for years," Mr. Hendricks said when Tucker hesitated to accept the loan. "And I know you will be a good neighbor. Take the loan, build your ranch, and pay me back as you can. I trust you, Tucker." So, in November of 1885, Tucker and Teresa Finch became property owners. They moved into the Patterson Ranch house with 2-year-old Thomas and immediately began the work of making it their own. The house needed repairs, but it was larger than the cabin and had good bones. More importantly, one of the outbuildings was perfect for converting into a glass studio. Tucker spent the winter working on both his new ranch and still helping out part-time at the Running Creek Ranch to maintain income. Teresa focused on setting up her studio, planning the layout carefully to make it both functional and safe. She wanted a workspace where she could create without worry about Thomas getting into dangerous areas, and where she could eventually teach others if she chose. By spring of 1886, the studio was complete. It was better than anything Teresa had worked with before, with proper ventilation, good light, and enough space for her to work on multiple projects at once. Marcus came to see it and was openly envious. "You have truly come into your own," he told his sister, walking through the studio and examining every detail. "This is a proper artist's workspace. I am proud of you, Teresa." "I could not have done it without Tucker," Teresa said, watching her husband through the window as he worked with horses in the corral. "He believed in my art enough to build this for me, to make it a priority even when money was tight." "He is a good man," Marcus agreed. "Better than I thought any cowboy could be, if I am honest. He handles your heart the way you handle glass, with gentle strength and constant care." The words struck Teresa deeply because they captured exactly what made her marriage work. Tucker was strong enough to support her dreams, gentle enough to let her pursue them in her own way, and constant enough that she never doubted his love. He handled her not as if she were fragile, but as if she were precious, and there was a world of difference between the two. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Tucker's knowledge and work ethic, combined with Teresa's business sense and growing income from her art, allowed them to build something solid. They acquired more horses, built up a small herd of cattle, and became known in the area as honest, hard-working people who kept their word. Teresa's reputation as an artist grew as well. Her pieces were sold in shops in Seattle and Portland, and she began to receive commissions from as far away as San Francisco. She raised her prices, but demand only increased. People wanted Teresa Parker Finch originals, drawn to the unique blend of delicacy and strength in her work. In the summer of 1887, Teresa discovered she was pregnant again. The news was both joyful and bittersweet, as she knew another pregnancy would disrupt her work schedule just as she was reaching new heights of success. But when she saw Tucker's face light up, and when she told 3-year-old Thomas he would be a big brother, she felt only happiness. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Teresa was older and more confident, or perhaps because she had learned to balance her needs with those of her family. She worked up until the final month, then handed off her pending commissions to Marcus, who had agreed to complete them in her style. Their daughter was born in February of 1888, arriving quickly and with far less difficulty than Thomas's birth. They named her Rose Catherine Finch, after Tucker's mother and Teresa's mother. She was a calm baby, so different from Thomas's colicky infancy that Teresa and Tucker often joked they had been blessed with an easy child to make up for the challenges of the first. Thomas adored his little sister from the moment he met her, insisting on helping with everything from changing her to singing her to sleep. Tucker watched his son's gentle care of the baby and felt his heart swell with pride. He was raising a good boy, one who understood that strength and gentleness could coexist. With 2 children, life became more complex but also richer. Teresa had to be more strategic about her glass-blowing time, but she found that the constraints made her more focused and efficient. She worked primarily during the children's nap times and in the evenings when Tucker could watch them, and she learned to maximize every minute in the studio. The years passed in a blur of work and family, and building a life together. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses, and showed early signs of having his father's way with animals. Rose was more creative, constantly drawing and making things, and Teresa suspected she might follow in her mother's artistic footsteps. By 1890, Tucker and Teresa had fully paid off their loan to Mr. Hendricks and owned their ranch free and clear. They celebrated quietly, just the 4 of them, with a special dinner and a toast to their hard work and good fortune. That evening, after the children were asleep, Tucker and Teresa sat on their porch and looked out over the land they had built together. "Remember when we met?" Tucker said, pulling Teresa close. "You had just broken that glass bird and you looked so devastated." "I remember thinking you were the kindest man I had ever met," Teresa replied, leaning into his warmth. "You could have been angry, but instead you were understanding. You saw me, really saw me, when everyone else just saw Marcus's delicate little sister. You were never delicate. You were always strong, you just needed someone to recognize it." Tucker kissed the top of her head. "I am so grateful I walked into that workshop that day. You changed my entire life, Teresa, made it into something I never imagined it could be." "We changed each other's lives," Teresa corrected. "You taught me that I could be both strong and gentle, that I did not have to choose between my art and having a family. You gave me the space to become fully myself." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, crickets chirping, a distant coyote howl, the soft rustle of wind through grass. It was a good life they had built, not always easy but rich with love and purpose. In 1892, tragedy struck when Marcus fell seriously ill with pneumonia. Teresa rushed to Spokane Falls to care for her brother, leaving the children with Tucker. She spent 2 weeks nursing Marcus, terrified that she would lose the only family she had left besides her husband and children. Marcus was delicate in a way Teresa had never been, and the illness ravaged him. But Teresa's determination and constant care pulled him through. She sat by his bedside day and night, forcing him to drink broth and water, keeping him warm and refusing to let him give up. When he finally turned the corner and began to recover, he looked at his sister with new eyes. "You saved my life," he said weakly. "You would have done the same for me," Teresa replied. "We are family, Marcus. We take care of each other." During his recovery, Marcus confessed that he had been thinking about selling the workshop and retiring. Peter, his assistant, had become skilled enough to take over, and Marcus was tired. The years of breathing in glass dust and working in heat had taken their toll on his health. "What would you do?" Teresa asked. "I thought I might come live near you and Tucker," Marcus said. "There is a small piece of land adjacent to your ranch that is for sale. I could buy it, build a little house, and live out my days in peace. Maybe do some simple glasswork for my own pleasure, without the pressure of commissions and deadlines." Teresa was thrilled at the idea of having her brother nearby. Tucker agreed immediately when she proposed it, and they helped Marcus purchase the land and build a modest house. By the fall of 1892, Marcus was settled in his new home, close enough to visit daily but far enough to maintain his independence. Having Marcus nearby enriched all their lives. He became a beloved uncle to Thomas and Rose, teaching them about glassblowing and telling them stories about their mother's youth. He and Tucker developed a genuine friendship, bonding over their shared love for Teresa and their appreciation for hard work and craftsmanship. And Teresa had her brother back in a way she had not since before their parents died, without the constant tension that had marked their working relationship. Thomas, now 8 years old, began to show interest in both his parents' vocations. He loved working with his father on the ranch, but was also fascinated by his mother's glassblowing. Teresa began teaching him the basics, starting with the simplest techniques and emphasizing safety. Tucker watched his son learning the craft and felt a deep satisfaction. The boy would have choices in life, could pursue whatever path called to him. Rose, at 4, was still too young for glassblowing, but she loved to draw and paint. Teresa encouraged this creativity, and Tucker built Rose a small workspace in the corner of the studio where she could make art alongside her mother. The sight of his wife and daughter working together, both absorbed in creation, never failed to move Tucker. In 1894, Mr. Hendricks died, and Mrs. Hendricks decided to sell the Running Creek Ranch and return to San Francisco. It was the end of an era, and both Tucker and Teresa felt the loss keenly. Mrs. Hendricks had been more than just a patron to Teresa. She had been a friend and mentor. And Mr. Hendricks had given Tucker his start, had believed in him when he was just a ranch hand looking for work. Before she left, Mrs. Hendricks came to visit the Finch Ranch one last time. She walked through Teresa's studio, admiring the new pieces, and spent time with Thomas and Rose. Then she gave Teresa a parting gift, a substantial check and a letter of introduction to one of the finest art galleries in San Francisco. "Your work deserves to be seen by more people," Mrs. Hendricks said. "This gallery specializes in American artists working in traditional crafts. They will appreciate what you do, Teresa. Promise me you will send them samples of your work." Teresa promised, and after Mrs. Hendricks left, she and Tucker discussed the opportunity. It would mean creating pieces specifically for a more sophisticated market, and there was risk involved in shipping such fragile items across long distances. But it was also an incredible opportunity to reach a wider audience. Tucker encouraged her to take the chance. "You have always dreamed of having your work recognized beyond the Washington territory," he said. "This is your opportunity. I will support you however I can." Teresa sent samples to the San Francisco gallery, carefully packed and insured. 3 weeks later, she received a response. The gallery wanted to represent her work and was planning a show featuring American glass artists. They wanted 20 pieces from her, to be delivered within 6 months. It was the biggest commission Teresa had ever received, and the most prestigious. She threw herself into the work with passion, creating pieces that showcased her full range of skill. She made functional items like vases and bowls, but also purely decorative pieces, glass sculptures of prairie animals, abstract forms that played with light and shadow, and delicate mobiles that moved with the slightest breeze. Tucker and Marcus helped however they could, with Tucker managing the ranch and household almost entirely so Teresa could focus on her work. Marcus assisted with the simpler pieces, and together they built custom crates for shipping that would protect the fragile glass. The show in San Francisco was a tremendous success. Teresa's pieces sold within the first week, and the gallery received requests for more. Suddenly, Teresa Parker Finch was known not just in the Washington territory, but up and down the West Coast. Newspapers wrote about her work, calling her a master craftsperson who brought unique vision to an ancient art form. The recognition was wonderful, but it also brought pressure. Teresa received more commission requests than she could possibly fulfill, and she had to learn to say no, to prioritize quality over quantity. She raised her prices significantly, which only seemed to increase demand. Tucker watched his wife navigate this success with pride, seeing how she stayed grounded despite the accolades. "You are famous now," he teased one evening after she received yet another glowing review in a San Francisco newspaper. "I am the same person I have always been," Teresa replied. "I just have more people appreciating my work, but none of it matters as much as this." She gestured around their home, at Tucker reading with Thomas, at Rose playing with a doll Marcus had carved, at the life they had built together. This was her real success, Teresa knew. The art was important, but it was this family, this love, that made everything else worthwhile. In 1896, when Teresa was 36 and Tucker 38, they were surprised to discover they were expecting another child. Their family had felt complete with 2 children, and they had not been trying for more. But life had other plans, and after the initial shock wore off, they embraced the unexpected blessing. Their youngest child, a boy they named Samuel Tucker Finch, was born in early 1897. He was a happy, energetic baby who kept them all on their toes. Thomas was now 13 and treated his baby brother with patient affection, while 9-year-old Rose appointed herself as Samuel's protector and constant companion. The years that followed were among the happiest of Teresa and Tucker's life together. The ranch prospered, becoming known for quality horses. Teresa's art continued to garner recognition and provide substantial income. Their children grew healthy and happy, each developing distinct personalities and interests. Thomas proved to have his father's natural ability with horses and his mother's artistic eye. By the time he was 16, he was designing and crafting leather saddles and tack that were both beautiful and functional, combining the skills of both his parents in his own unique way. Rose pursued art with single-minded determination, learning glassblowing from her mother and Uncle Marcus, but also exploring painting and sculpture. She had Teresa's creativity and Tucker's quiet strength, and at 14, she was already selling her own glass pieces through her mother's gallery connections. Samuel, the surprise baby, grew into a cheerful boy who loved nothing more than following his father around the ranch, learning everything Tucker had to teach. At 5 years old, he could already help with the horses and was constantly asking questions about how things worked. Marcus remained a constant presence in their lives, now in his 60s but still active and engaged. He had found peace in his retirement, creating glass pieces for pleasure rather than profit and taking joy in his role as uncle to Teresa's children. He and Tucker would sit on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, 2 men from different backgrounds who had found common ground in their love for Teresa, and for the life they had all built together. In the summer of 1902, Teresa and Tucker celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children planned a surprise party, inviting friends and neighbors from throughout the area. The celebration was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hung for when evening fell. As Teresa looked around at the gathered crowd, at her children laughing with friends, at Marcus telling stories to a group of youngsters, at the neighbors who had become like extended family, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life had exceeded anything she had imagined 20 years ago, when she had been a frustrated young woman trapped in her brother's shadow. Tucker found her standing alone for a moment, watching the party from the porch. He slipped his arm around her waist, and she leaned into him automatically, a gesture so familiar after 20 years that neither thought about it. "What are you thinking?" Tucker asked. "I am thinking about the day we met," Teresa said. I had just broken that glass bird and I felt like my world was ending. I had no idea that the cowboy who walked through the door would become my whole world. I saw you that day, holding that dustpan of broken glass, and something in me just knew, Tucker said. I did not know we would fall in love or build this life together, but I knew you were important, that you were someone I needed to know. You handled my heart with such gentle strength, Teresa said softly. From that first day until now, you have always treated me as if I were both strong and precious. You never made me choose between being an artist and being a wife and mother. You gave me room to be everything I wanted to be. You did the same for me, Tucker replied. I was just a ranch hand with dreams of something more. You believed in me, supported me, and helped me build those dreams into reality. Everything good in my life comes from you, Teresa. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their family and friends celebrate. Thomas caught sight of them and raised his glass in a toast, and the gathered crowd joined in, toasting Tucker and Teresa Finch and the 20 years of love and partnership they represented. As the evening wore on and the lanterns glowed against the darkening sky, Teresa felt a profound sense of completion. She had started as a glassblower sister, creating fragile art in her brother's shadow. But she had become so much more, an artist in her own right, a wife, a mother, a partner in building a successful ranch. And through it all, Tucker had been beside her, handling her heart with the same gentle strength she used with her glass, understanding that fragile things could also be powerful, that they deserved care not because they were weak, but because they were precious. The years continued to pass in their quiet corner of Washington Territory, which became Washington State in 1889. Teresa and Tucker grew older together, watching their children grow into adults with their own dreams and ambitions. Thomas eventually took over management of the ranch, allowing Tucker to step back and focus on the aspects of the work he loved most, training horses and working outdoors. Rose moved to San Francisco to study art formally, though she returned regularly to visit, and continued to maintain her connections to her mother's glass-blowing legacy. Samuel, true to form, stayed close to home, becoming his brother's right hand in running the ranch. Marcus lived to the age of 72, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1905. His death was a blow to Teresa, but she took comfort in knowing he had spent his final years happy and surrounded by family. She created a memorial piece for him, a glass sculpture of intertwined flames that represented the furnace fire that had brought them together and sustained them through so much. It sat in a place of honor in her studio for the rest of her life. Teresa continued to create glass art into her 60s, though she worked less frequently as her hands began to show the effects of age. She had trained several apprentices over the years, passing on her knowledge and techniques, ensuring that her particular style of glassblowing would continue. But she never lost the joy of creation, the thrill of transforming raw materials into beauty. Tucker remained active on the ranch well into his 70s, still rising early and spending his days among the horses he loved. He moved slower than he once had, and his hands were gnarled from decades of hard work, but his spirit remained strong. He and Teresa would sit together in the evenings, on the same porch where they had shared so many conversations over the years, and talk about their lives with satisfaction. "Do you have any regrets?" Teresa asked him one evening when they were both in their mid-70s. Tucker considered the question seriously, as he always did. "No major ones. I wish I could have given you more sometimes. A bigger house, more luxuries." "I never wanted those things," Teresa said firmly. "You gave me exactly what I needed, freedom to pursue my art, children to love, and a partnership built on mutual respect. What more could anyone ask for? Then no, Tucker said, taking her hand in his. I have no regrets. I walked into a glass-blowing workshop 40-plus years ago and found the love of my life. Everything else has been bonus. They had grandchildren by then. Thomas and his wife had 3 children, and Rose had recently had her first baby. Teresa and Tucker delighted in these grandchildren, seeing pieces of themselves reflected in these new generations. They told stories of the old days, of Spokane Falls in the 1880s, when the Washington Territory was still wild and opportunity beckoned to those brave enough to seize it. Tucker and Teresa Finch lived to see the 20th century bring enormous changes to their corner of the world. Automobiles began to replace horses and wagons. Electricity came to even remote ranches. The world became more connected, smaller in some ways but also fuller of possibility. Through all these changes, their love remained constant. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative. Harsh winters, economic downturns, the normal trials that come with raising children and running a business. But they had faced everything together, supporting each other through every challenge. Teresa Parker Finch passed away peacefully in 1920 at the age of 60. She died as she had lived, surrounded by beauty, with Tucker holding her hand and her children gathered around her. Her final words were about the glass piece she had been planning, the colors she wanted to use, the way the light would play through it. Even at the end, she was creating. Tucker, bereft without his beloved wife, nevertheless lived on for 5 more years. He spent those years ensuring their legacy continued. The ranch running smoothly under Thomas's management, Rose's artistic career flourishing, Samuel building his own family. He told stories about Teresa to anyone who would listen, keeping her memory vivid and alive. When Tucker died in 1925, just shy of his 87th birthday, his last thoughts were of Teresa. Of the day they met, of their wedding, of 1,000 small moments that had made up their life together. He had handled her heart with gentle strength for over 40 years, and she had done the same for him. It had been, by any measure, a love story worth remembering. Their children ensured that both their parents were remembered. The ranch continued through generations, always called the Finch Ranch. Teresa's glass pieces became collectors' items, displayed in museums and private collections throughout the West. The glass studio remained operational, training new generations of artists in techniques Teresa had pioneered and perfected. But more than these tangible legacies, Tucker and Teresa left behind something more important: proof that love built on mutual respect, gentle strength, and unwavering support could weather any storm. They had taken the fragile beginning of their relationship, a broken glass bird and a chance meeting, and transformed it into something that lasted a lifetime. The cowboy and the glassblower's sister had found in each other exactly what they needed. Someone who understood that strength and gentleness were not opposites but complementary forces, that fragile things could be powerful, and that handling a heart required both courage and care. Their story became legend in the Spokane area, told and retold as an example of how true partnership should work, how 2 people could support each other's dreams while building something beautiful together. In the end, Teresa Parker's early assessment proved true. Tucker Finch had handled her heart with gentle strength from their first meeting until his last breath, treating her not as if she were fragile and weak, but as if she were precious and powerful. And she had done the same for him, shaping their love with the same skill and care she brought to her art, creating something that, like her finest glass pieces, caught the light and reflected beauty for all to see.